The bar was dimly lit, its cracked wooden floors sticky from years of spilled beer and forgotten nights. The walls, once painted a deep red, had faded to a murky brown, covered in posters of forgotten bands and peeling advertisements for long-gone gigs. A lone neon sign buzzed weakly above the bar, casting a faint pink glow over the rows of mismatched bottles and scratched glasses. Jay McCullen sat on a rickety stool in the corner, his guitar resting against his knee. The small stage wasn't really a stage, just a raised platform with a frayed rug thrown on top. The microphone stand wobbled whenever he leaned too close, and the amp behind him emitted a low hum like it was alive. The crowd was a mix of tired workers, regulars nursing cheap drinks, and the occasional college kid looking for something authentic. No one really listened, not for long. Jay played the songs they wanted to hear, familiar hits that earned him polite applause, but left him hollow inside. As his fingers moved across the strings, his mind wandered. He didn't belong here, not to this cracked floor, this fading bar, this life where dreams seemed like distant stars. He wanted more. A studio. A space where his music could live and breathe. But dreams like that cost money, and money was something Jay didn't have. Jay McCullen had music in his blood, or at least that's what his father always said. Jay grew up in a small town outside New Orleans, where the air was thick with the hum of cicadas and the occasional notes of a distant saxophone. His father, Danny Mac McCullen, was a traveling musician, a jack of all trades who played guitar, harmonica, and even the drums if the gig demanded it. Mac and his ragtag band of old friends, the Bayou Strummers, spent their lives on the road, crammed into a beat-up van with peeling paint and a bumper sticker that read, "Music is freedom." For Jay, childhood meant constant movement. He didn't have a hometown, just a collection of highway motels, diners with sticky menus, and dive bars where he'd fall asleep on a stack of chairs while his father played late into the night. Mac wasn't famous, but he was passionate. His music was a blend of blues, folk, and a touch of country, the kind of sound that made people tap their feet and smile, even if they didn't remember the band's name the next day. Despite the struggles, Jay idolized his father. He loved the spontaneity of their life, the stories Mac would tell about playing at roadside festivals or getting a free meal because the cook loved their sound. Most of all, he loved watching Mac on stage, the way the music seemed to transform him, to make him larger than life. When Jay turned 16, Mac gave him his first guitar, a battered old thing with a crack in the neck, but a surprisingly sweet tone. "This was my first guitar," Mac had said, handing it over like it was a family heirloom. "Now it's yours. Make it sing, son." Jay was just 18 when the accident happened. The band had been on their way to a late-night gig, the van packed with instruments and amplifiers, when a semi-truck ran a red light and collided with them. Jay wasn't there that night. His mother had insisted he stay home to study for exams. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table when the call came. Mac and 2 other band members were killed instantly. The news shattered Jay's world. For a long time, he couldn't even touch the guitar his father had given him, the one with the crack in the neck and the surprisingly sweet tone. It sat in the corner of his room, gathering dust as Jay wrestled with guilt, grief, and the daunting question of what his own future might hold. His mother, Sarah, was devastated but resilient. She threw herself into her 2 jobs, working tirelessly to keep them afloat. "Your father's dream was beautiful," she'd tell Jay, "but dreams can be dangerous too. Promise me you'll find something steady." But Jay couldn't let go of the dream. Music was the only thing that made him feel alive, the only way he could honor his father's memory. So he picked up the guitar again, relearning the songs Mac had taught him and eventually writing his own. Now at 25, Jay found himself playing in a dingy bar in Boston, singing cover songs to half-listening crowds. His own music, his true voice, was locked away, waiting for a chance to escape. His father's dream had been to play for whoever would listen. Jay's dream was different. He wanted to build something permanent, a studio where his music could live on. Jay McCullen lived in a tiny, cluttered flat on the outskirts of Boston. The peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards were a constant reminder of how far he was from the life he wanted. The walls were lined with second-hand furniture, his father's old guitar resting in the corner next to a small stack of notebooks, filled with half-written songs. Even with the gigs he played at night, the money he earned wasn't enough. Most weeks, he barely scraped by, juggling overdue utility bills and the cost of guitar strings that always seemed to snap at the worst moments. His dream of saving up for a music studio felt like a cruel joke. That's why, despite everything, Jay had no choice but to work during the day. His day job was a nightmare, a soul-crushing grind where he worked as a human billboard, wearing a ridiculous fast food costume on street corners. Standing outside in the cold, waving at uninterested passers-by, he felt like a caricature of himself, his talent reduced to a cheap gimmick. Jay hated the job with every fiber of his being. The uniform was hot and itchy in the summer, freezing in the winter, and humiliating year-round. People honked at him, not out of support, but to mock the desperate man trying to make ends meet. He tried to block it all out, to imagine himself somewhere else. But the reality was always there. The job paid more than his music gigs. As much as he hated it, the job allowed him to survive. It paid for the flat, the groceries, and just enough to keep him going. But it drained him, leaving little energy for the one thing he truly cared about, his music. Every day felt like a battle between what he had to do and what he wanted to do. And every night, as he stepped onto the small stage in the bar, he wondered how much longer he could keep living this way. Something had to change. One day, fed up with the cycle of scraping by, Jay decided to take a leap. He walked into the local bank, clutching a folder with his savings records and a hastily written plan for the music studio he dreamed of building. Sitting across from the bank worker in a cramped cubicle, Jay felt a mix of nerves and hope. He explained his vision with as much passion as he could muster, describing the studio where he would record his own music and help other struggling artists do the same. The worker listened with a blank expression, her pen tapping against the desk. When Jay finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked, "And what do you do for a living?" "I'm a musician," Jay said, hesitating slightly before adding, "And during the day I work in advertising." "Advertising?" The worker raised an eyebrow. "I wear a costume for a fast food chain," he admitted reluctantly. "But it's temporary. This loan would help me." The worker cut him off with a laugh, a sharp, dismissive sound that stung more than Jay expected. "A human billboard? That's your job? I'm sorry, but no bank is going to approve a loan for someone with that kind of occupation. You're a high risk." Jay sat there, stunned. The worker didn't even try to hide her smirk as she gathered the papers he'd brought. "Come back when you have a real source of income," she added, handing them back to him. As Jay left the bank, the rejection echoed in his mind. Not just the word no, but the laughter, the dismissal of everything he was trying to achieve. Something inside him hardened. If no one was willing to help him, he would have to find another way, no matter what it took. That evening at the bar, Jay took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the strings of his guitar. The humiliation from the bank still burned in his chest, and without thinking, he began to play the song that had been echoing in his mind since he'd walked out of that cold, judgmental office. "As soon as you're born, they make you feel small by giving you no time instead of it all, till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all. A working-class hero is something to be." It felt like Lennon understood exactly what it was like to be trapped in a cycle, fighting for something more, only to be rejected by the world around him. The words rang in his ears, echoing his own feelings of being overlooked, dismissed, and forced to settle for a life that wasn't his dream. That night, as Jay was sitting in his small apartment after his frustrating day, he flicked on the TV to unwind. The screen lit up with a familiar logo, the sleek white Apple emblem, accompanied by the voiceover, "Think different." It was a powerful, minimalist advertisement that seemed to speak directly to him. Apple's famous campaign was all about celebrating those who dared to challenge the status quo, those who dreamed big and took risks to achieve something extraordinary. As the words echoed in his mind, Jay felt a rush of conflicting emotions. He had always dreamed of being more than just a musician playing in a bar or a human billboard. But the weight of reality had kept him grounded. The slogan felt like a small spark of hope, a reminder that innovation, success, and the realization of dreams sometimes came to those who were willing to take the unconventional path. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way out of his current situation and into the life he had always imagined. The next morning, Jay was walking to work, feeling the weight of his double life pressing down on him. His stomach churned at the thought of the ridiculous uniform he had to wear. Bright, attention-grabbing clothing that made him feel more like a walking advertisement than a person. It was a daily reminder of how far he was from his dream. As he walked down the street trying to keep his head low, a man sitting near the building suddenly tossed something in front of him. Jay barely avoided stepping on it as it landed almost at his feet, a syringe still dripping with the drug he had used the night before. "Be careful where you throw your stuff," Jay shouted, his voice breaking the early morning silence as he glared at the man sitting on the sidewalk. The stranger looked up, his expression unreadable. The syringe, still airborne from being tossed, landed right at Jay's feet with a dull thud. As Jay walked away from the strange encounter, his mind began to replay the face of the bank employee from the day before. He couldn't shake the image of that smug, dismissive expression, the way the man had laughed when Jay had asked for the loan. That laugh echoed in his ears, building the anger inside him like a pressure cooker. Maybe I could stick that syringe right into his tongue, he thought, imagining the look on the man's face if he felt just a fraction of the humiliation Jay had felt. The thought of revenge sparked a fury in him, and with every second his frustration reached a boiling point. Jay realized that he wouldn't be able to live like this any longer, trapped in a cycle of rejection and despair. If he didn't find a way to get the money for his music studio, his dream would slip even further out of reach, leaving him with nothing but this suffocating existence. The realization hit hard. He had no choice but to do whatever it took to make that dream a reality, no matter the cost. On his way home, Jay passed by the bank where he had been the day before. As he walked by, he noticed the same employee from yesterday stepping out of the building and heading off down the street. The sight of the man stirred up the same anger that had been boiling inside him since the rejection. Jay's eyes followed him for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of what he could do. As Jay watched the employee from the bank walk away, something clicked inside him. The anger that had been simmering inside him for days finally erupted, and he understood what he had to do. "I will rob the bank," he thought. The same bank that had rejected him, laughed at him, and crushed his dreams. The same place where he had asked for a loan to make his music studio a reality, only to be humiliated. The realization was chilling, but it also felt oddly liberating. In his mind, the robbery would be his way of taking back control, of proving that he didn't need their approval to succeed. The weight of his decision hung heavy, but Jay knew that it was the only way he could get the money for his dream. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he might have a chance to finally make something happen. Jay didn't sleep all night, his mind racing with possibilities. He scoured the internet for information on bank robberies, methods, scenarios, and every detail he could find. The hours dragged on as he read stories of failed heists, successful ones, and everything in between. His thoughts bounced between planning the perfect robbery and the risks involved. He imagined different scenarios. What if the police were quick to respond? What if he couldn't get past the security system? But he also thought about the rewards, how this could be his chance to escape his dead-end life. The adrenaline of his decision kept him up, each scenario more vivid than the last. He had no other option. This was the only way he could see to get the money he needed for his music studio. Jay realized that without a weapon he wouldn't be able to intimidate anyone effectively during the robbery. He'd be putting himself at a serious disadvantage. His fists alone wouldn't cut it. But the problem was, he didn't have a gun. As Jay leaned out of his window, he saw the same homeless man he had encountered the day before. The man had tossed the syringe near his feet, and in that moment, an idea struck him like lightning. He could use the syringe. The thought seemed so simple, almost absurdly brilliant. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but Jay knew it could be intimidating enough to make someone comply. He didn't need a gun. He had something even more subtle, something no one would expect. It was a dangerous, risky plan, but in his mind it was the only way. Jay's mind raced as he considered the substance to fill the syringe. He needed something that could easily scare someone into submission, but not something that would leave permanent harm. It needed to be something he could get his hands on quickly, and that wouldn't draw too much attention. A thought flickered in his mind. An anesthetic. Something that could cause a temporary loss of consciousness or disorientation without causing major harm. It had to be quick and effective, just enough to give him the edge he needed. He thought of local pharmacies, street vendors, and possible underground sources. Time was running out, and he couldn't afford any mistakes. Jay understood perfectly that if he didn't act now, he might never have the courage to follow through. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and the fear of hesitation gnawed at his mind. He knew that once the adrenaline subsided, once he stepped back into the routine of his meaningless job, it would be too easy to forget this plan, too easy to let it slip away into the back of his mind, just like all the other failed attempts at making his dreams a reality. He had reached the breaking point. This was his only shot, the last chance to grab hold of his future. If he didn't do it now, he'd always wonder, what if? Jay made his decision quickly. The very next evening, he went straight to the local club where he knew he could find what he was looking for. The place was dark, crowded, and filled with the noise of the late-night crowd. He knew exactly who to approach. With a subtle nod, he made contact with one of the dealers, someone who'd never raised suspicion. A quick exchange, a whispered word, and he had what he needed: ketamine. The substance was sealed in a small vial, easy to conceal and potent enough for his plans. His mind raced with what he would do next. He had the key to everything. Jay couldn't wait any longer. The decision had been made, and he was determined to see it through. The next day, he planned everything carefully, choosing the perfect time. Late afternoon, just before the bank was about to close. He knew the risks, but the thrill of finally having control over his future pushed him forward. He was ready. Jay had prepared 2 syringes filled with ketamine. He knew the power of the drug and how quickly it would take effect. The first syringe was a calculated move, but the second one was a backup, just in case something went wrong. He needed to be certain. Jay entered the bank, his heart racing. He had carefully planned everything, down to his disguise. A fake mustache, a cap, and a beard, just enough to make him blend in and not attract attention. The syringa, tucked securely in his pocket, was his ticket to control the situation. He needed to remain calm. The plan was simple: approach the employee he had seen the day before, grab him quickly, and hold the syringe near his neck. He would make it clear that it contained a lethal poison. The message would be simple: open the vault, or the poison would be injected. His pulse quickened as he spotted the employee sitting at his desk, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Jay adjusted his grip on the syringe in his pocket, ready to take action. As Jay was just a few steps away from his target, he heard a voice from behind shout, "It's a robbery! Get down on the floor and don't move!" No way. This couldn't be happening. On the same day, in the same bank, someone else had planned a heist. Jay, just moments away from executing his own plan, couldn't believe it. His moment of reckoning was slipping away, tangled in bad timing and bad luck. Jay's mind immediately jumped to some of the lyrics he knew well, especially from Loser by Beck with the famous line, "I'm a loser, baby, so why don't you kill me?" It felt like fate was playing a cruel joke on him, trapping him in yet another bad situation, as if life itself was telling him he was just doomed to fail. At that moment, Jay had no choice but to comply. He dropped to the ground, lying flat, just like the others around him. His heart raced as he lay there, thinking about how everything had gone so wrong. It felt surreal, like he was caught in the middle of a bad dream that he couldn't escape. Before lying down, Jay turned toward the source of the voice and saw 2 men. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially covered, one of them holding a gun. The second man stood by, looking around the room. His mind was spinning, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Jay realized he still had an advantage. The robbers didn't know who he was or what his intentions were. To them, he was just another customer on the floor, someone who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. As they moved toward the tellers, his plan was still in motion, hidden beneath the chaos. He could blend in for now, wait for the right moment, and use this confusion to his benefit. One of the robbers approached the employee at the counter, demanding that he open the vaults. His voice was firm, laced with impatience and frustration, as the tension in the room mounted. Jay watched carefully, his heart racing. The robbers were focused on the bank staff, not paying much attention to the customers on the floor, which gave him an opportunity to remain unnoticed for the moment. Jay could feel the weight of the syringe in his pocket, ready to act, but his mind raced with uncertainty. Jay understood that in this situation he had the advantage. The other two robbers were so focused on their task that they weren't paying attention to the customers around them. The bank employee was complying, clearly trying to stay calm under pressure. Jay watched as the vaults were emptied, and when the robber with the duffel bag full of cash approached him, he knew the moment had arrived. The robber, distracted by the loot in his hands, didn't even glance at Jay as he passed by. This was Jay's chance. With a quick movement, Jay grabbed the syringe from his pocket, ready to act, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't just another customer anymore, he was in control. With a swift motion, Jay rolled across the floor and plunged the syringe into the robber's leg. The man let out a sharp gasp, his body jerking in shock as the contents of the needle began to take effect. His vision blurred, his strength faltering as the sedative took hold. The second robber, frozen in shock, stood still, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He watched in disbelief as his partner dropped the duffel bag, the money spilling out as the man collapsed to the floor. It all seemed surreal, his mind struggling to process the sudden turn of events. Confused and desperate, the second robber rushed over to his fallen partner, shaking him violently in an attempt to rouse him. But there was no response. His partner remained limp, his body unnaturally still. Panic surged through the robber as he realized something was terribly wrong. The sight of the duffel bag with the camniscatados scattered on the floor seemed to mock him in the silence that followed. While the second robber was still focused on his fallen partner, Jay knew this wasn't the end. He had to act quickly before the situation turned in favor of the criminals. With a swift move, Jay pulled out the second syringe from his pocket and without hesitation jabbed it into the back of the remaining robber. The effect was almost immediate. The man froze for a moment, confusion and panic flashing across his face as the drug took hold. His body slumped, losing control. Jay, now in control of the situation, quickly rose to his feet, ready to make his next move. The employees, paralyzed in fear, seemed like mannequins unable to move. Everything was happening so quickly and unexpectedly that none of them had the presence of mind to call the police. Meanwhile, Jay seized the gun that had fallen from the robber's hand and pointed it at the security guard. The tension in the air was palpable. The guard froze, eyes wide in terror, realizing that he was now a part of the chaos. Jay's heart raced as he focused on what he needed to do next. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He had become an active player in a situation he never imagined he'd be part of. After making a gesture for the employee who had laughed at him to come closer, Jay watched as the man, trembling, hesitantly approached. Jay grabbed him by the neck, dragging him toward the exit. With one hand, he kept the gun pointed at the security guard, while in the other, he held the syringe near the employee's neck. Over his shoulder, the heavy duffel bag filled with cash hung. Jay knew the syringe was empty, but the employee had no way of knowing that. The moment felt surreal, almost as if Jay were in a dream, where the control he had longed for was finally his. Each second, a new layer of realization came to him. He wasn't just taking the money, he was reclaiming his life, even if it meant risking everything. Jay wanted to scream in the employee's ear, reminding him that people shouldn't be treated the way he had been treated, that no one had the right to decide which job was inferior or superior, and who deserved a loan. But he understood that if he said it, the employee would finally recognize who he was. Instead, Jay tightened his grip on the man's neck, the anger burning through him. He dragged the employee toward the exit and pushed him through the door, stepping out of the bank. Jay walked quickly toward the corner and without hesitation began running. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, as though every second counted and there was no turning back. The adrenaline coursed through him, each step fueled by the chaos he had just unleashed, and the burning desire to get away. Jay wasn't an expert in robberies, but he knew he had to get rid of the fake mustache and beard as quickly as possible. Moving through dark, empty alleys, he yanked everything off his face. When he reached the car parked a few blocks away, he was once again Jay, no longer the man he had been in the bank. His heart raced, but now he had a few precious moments to breathe. As he drove away, the weight of what he had done began to sink in, but for now, he was free. Jay decided to head to Blue Hills Reservation, a large park and forested area south of Boston, to get rid of any traces of his disguise. As he entered the forest, the seclusion offered a temporary sense of safety. He quickly made his way off the beaten path, finding a quiet spot between the trees. There he dug a small hole in the earth, burying the fake mustache, beard, and gloves. Each item was carefully hidden, the dirt sealing them away as if to erase the very identity he had assumed just hours earlier. The cool, damp earth felt like a final step in severing his connection to the persona he had created for the heist. With his disguise discarded, Jay stood up, his breath heavy from both the physical exertion and the weight of his actions. Now with no trace of his earlier deception, he was ready to continue moving forward. When Jay returned home, he locked the door and secured all the windows. He sat down and began to count the money. As the stacks of cash piled up in front of him, he could hardly believe his eyes. $15 million in cash. It was an unimaginable sum. Jay had never seen, let alone touched, that much money in his life. The realization hit him hard. This was a life-changing amount, and the weight of what he had done began to sink in. The next day, the local newspapers were filled with shocking headlines. Unidentified hero stops 2 armed robbers from Winter Hill Gang during bank heist. The article detailed the daring confrontation at the bank, where an unknown individual had managed to subdue the 2 robbers, both of whom were confirmed to be affiliated with the notorious and dangerous Winter Hill Gang. When Jay saw the story, his heart sank. The realization of who he had taken the money from hit him like a freight train. The Winter Hill Gang was infamous for its violent history, and the idea that he had just robbed such a dangerous group made his legs weak with fear. He had no idea who else might be looking for him now. This revelation changed everything for Jay. The Winter Hill Gang was a feared criminal organization, and the very thought of them hunting him down made him question his next move. Jay decided not to show up for his usual job as a human billboard. He told his boss that he wasn't feeling well, but in truth he couldn't risk being seen by anyone who might notice something was off after the robbery. However, he knew he had to go to the bar where he often played music. It wasn't just a place to earn money, it was also a hub for news and gossip. Everything that happened in the city seemed to pass through the bar, and he needed to hear what people were saying about the heist. Besides, the bar owner could be getting suspicious. Jay had already been acting differently lately, and the last thing he needed was for someone to start asking questions. He couldn't afford to raise any alarms. So, despite the tension building in him, he made his way there, hoping to keep a low profile while figuring out what to do next. As Jay entered the bar, the usual chatter paused for a moment, and he could immediately sense the shift in the air. The regulars, always quick to talk, were murmuring about the events that had unfolded at the bank just the day before. Some claimed to have heard a version of the story on the radio, while others were getting their facts from a friend of a friend. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. One of the older men at the bar, a frequent customer who claimed to have worked in security for years, was explaining how the robbery had unfolded. 2 guys from the Winter Hill Gang were behind it, he said, lowering his voice. They're no amateurs, but they didn't expect this. Some guy, no one's sure who, ended up taking them out. Cops are baffled. They're calling him a hero, but I wouldn't be surprised if the whole thing was some setup. Too perfect. Another regular, a bartender who had worked in Boston for years, leaned in and added, "People are saying the guy who took him down was just a bystander. But with the Winter Hill name thrown around, who knows? Some people are speculating that this might be an inside job, someone who knew exactly how the gang operates. One woman who had heard the news from a local police officer at the diner mentioned how strange it was that no one had recognized the unknown hero. You'd think someone would know who he was by now. But no, it's like he disappeared into thin air. As Jay stood there listening to the stories, a cold sweat ran down his back. The realization that the Winter Hill Gang was involved, those notorious criminals that ruled parts of Boston for years, made his heart race. If they found out it was him, his life would change forever. The news was already spreading, and soon everyone would be talking about the mysterious robber who had put down two of the city's most dangerous men. The last week had been the longest of Jay's life. He felt as though every step he took was under the watchful eyes of someone, and every sound made him freeze, looking over his shoulder. The streets felt different now, like they were full of hidden dangers lurking around every corner. The quiet shuffle of footsteps behind him made his heart race, and the sound of a distant car horn made him jump. Jay couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched, that the whole city was somehow aware of what he'd done. He was terrified to leave his apartment, knowing that the news of the robbery and the mysterious hero had spread far beyond the bar. The Winter Hill Gang's involvement in the heist was enough to make anyone in Boston nervous. Their reputation was notorious, and the fear of retribution was a constant weight on Jay's shoulders. Would they find him? Would someone in the street recognize him from the headlines? Could they trace the money back to him? As Jay went through his daily routine, he kept his head down and avoided making eye contact with anyone. He didn't trust the people around him anymore, not since the rumors had started. The gang was everywhere, and the tension in the air made every moment feel like a countdown to something he couldn't predict. His mind raced, replaying the event over and over again, trying to figure out if he'd missed anything, if there was any clue that would lead back to him. A week had passed since the robbery, but Jay couldn't shake off the fear. That night, a Saturday evening, the city of Boston seemed to suddenly come alive. Police sirens roared through the streets, the piercing sound of racing cars, and no one really understood what was happening. But one thing was clear to everyone. Something big was about to happen. People were peeking out of windows, while excitement was growing all around. Some said there had been another violent crime, others spoke of a police operation in progress, but no one knew for sure what was going on. For Jay, however, anxiety grew with every siren. His mind was fixated on one thought, that they were coming for him. Every noise seemed to get closer to his door, every face on the street seemed to look at him with suspicion. The idea that something was connected to the robbery tormented him, and he could feel the tension in the air. The city, so alive at night, now seemed like a huge labyrinth where every corner hid a danger. On Sunday morning, all the local newspapers were filled with stories about the shocking revelations. Members of the Winter Hill Gang had accused members of the rival Patriarcha crime family of being behind the bank robbery from a week earlier. The news hit like a bombshell, shaking the city. According to sources, the Winter Hill Gang had decided to seek revenge against the Patriarcha crime family for the humiliation they felt after the heist, which they believed was masterminded by their rivals. The plan for revenge was already set in motion. The Winter Hill Gang intended to eliminate key members of the Patriarcha crime family to reassert their dominance. With their informants in place, the police acted swiftly, moving quickly to the location where the supposed meeting between the two rival gangs, the Winter Hill Gang and the Patriarcha crime family, was set to take place. They were prepared to intervene before any violence could break out. The tense situation, with both gangs on edge, could have escalated into a bloodbath, but thanks to the early action of law enforcement, the confrontation was prevented. The police had gathered enough intel to anticipate the gang's next move, and by intercepting them before the meeting, they were able to avert further bloodshed and dismantle part of the brewing conflict. Jay couldn't believe it. When he realized that no one suspected him, he finally felt free. The tension that had been gnawing at him for days began to lift. The chaos of the robbery, the fear of being caught, the constant surveillance of the police, it all seemed like it had been a nightmare. But now, with the Winter Hill Gang's troubles escalating and attention diverted to other players in the criminal world, he was invisible. His escape was complete, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jay allowed himself to breathe, unburdened by the weight of his actions. The money, the risk, and the reputation of his unintended involvement in a much bigger criminal game didn't matter anymore. After everything that had happened, Jay knew it was time to leave Boston behind. The tension, the fear, the constant looking over his shoulder. It was too much to bear. The city had become a prison for him, and he had no desire to stay any longer. With the police and the gangs entangled in their own war, he could see the writing on the wall. It was only a matter of time before things would catch up with him. So, with a quiet resolve, he made up his mind. Jay sold everything he could, packed his things, and headed west. Los Angeles was the fresh start he needed, a place where no one knew him, where he could disappear into the anonymity of the city. As Jay made his way to Los Angeles, a sense of excitement began to replace the anxiety that had followed him through every moment of his past life. The city of dreams, where anything was possible, felt like the perfect place to leave behind everything that had weighed him down. But more than anything, it was the realization of his long-held dream that fueled his decision. For years, Jay had dreamed of owning a music studio. It had always seemed like a distant goal, a fantasy that couldn't coexist with the harsh realities of his life. But now, with a fresh start ahead of him and the money to make it happen, he could finally turn his dream into reality. Los Angeles was a hub of creativity, the place where music legends were born. He could feel the pulse of opportunity, and for the first time, Jay saw himself as a part of it. As he drove toward the sprawling cityscape, his heart raced with possibility. He could already picture himself in a small but vibrant studio, surrounded by the hum of recording equipment, the energy of musicians, and the sound of creativity flowing freely. The stolen money had bought him freedom, but it was the studio that would give him purpose. Jay was ready to leave his past behind and make something of himself, a fresh chapter in a city full of potential. This time, he wouldn't be defined by the mistakes of his past. Instead, he would build something he could be proud of, a future grounded in music, his one true passion.